So again, good morning to everyone, and we're going to be talking to you about accounting changes for 2019 and beyond. Wrong presentation? No. Or legal. Were we doing legal? Never seen this many people show up for compliance presentation. No. We're actually touching the third rail today, ladies and gentlemen. We're talking about something that those of you who are in 20 groups with us know we've shied away from this topic as untouchable, unspeakable, blah, blah, blah. Integrating buy here, pay here, and retail operations under the same roof. You can probably guess there's a lot of questions that have to be answered for you to stay within your compliance box. But we will get into that as we go through this. That's what we're talking about today. Standard disclaimer, meaning no matter what I tell you, you can't hold me responsible for it ever. Sound good? All right. A little bit about me. For those of you who don't know me, my name is David Brotherton. I'm a 20 group moderator and training consultant with NIADA, Dealer 20 Groups. I have been moderating and consulting in the independent space since 2011. Prior to that, I was with JD Byrider for 12 years. And prior to that, I was collecting small loans. I write a lot of magazine articles, do a lot of speaking, but what really gets me going is 20 group meetings and the site work that I do for a lot of dealers. The opportunity to see your facilities, to meet your people, to see your processes, to roll up my sleeves and actually work with your troops, it does an enormous amount. So I enjoy that very much. I've got 2 kids who are approaching college age, so you guys need to join 20 groups. I need the money. That couldn't get any more than that? Okay, all right. Justin.
Sure. Hey everybody, how you doing this morning? My name is Justin Osborne. I'm also with NIADA. I'm NIADA's retail 20 group moderator and also the certified master dealer instructor. It's great to be with you. My background is actually interesting for this topic. I was a buy here, pay here dealer in just south of Kansas City for about 7 years. I had about 900 loans on the books or credit contracts. And so I know that side of the business as well, but also done a ton of work on the independent retail side, franchise work as well. So this is a very interesting topic for me. Hopefully it is for you. Just so we can get a gauge of the audience really quick, would you raise your hand if you're currently a buy here, pay here operator? Awesome. And would you raise your hand if you're a retail operator? Okay. And raise your hand if you do both. Awesome. So just a good to understand who we got here. So,
precisely what I expected.
Yeah. So welcome.
So what we're talking about today is there's 2 scenarios, okay? Let's imagine that you're a buy here, pay here dealer. Hi, I see some of you guys out there. Good to see you. And you're looking to improve cash flow. You want to add a few retail units to your repertoire. Maybe you want to carry some higher ACV units that you're not comfortable financing yourself. The logic behind this is a no-brainer. Everybody's wanted to do this forever. But we've gotten ourselves scared away from it for compliance reasons. Now let's imagine you're that retail dealer that Justin was asking about. Same thing. Hey, it's every month's 0 to 0. You either make it or you don't. I think retail is a really tough business, and I respect the heck out of you guys who succeed in retail because you've got no residual income. In my buy here, pay here world, I can have a bad sales month and it just doesn't matter. All that means is I don't have to use as much cash next month to replace inventory. But I've still got lots of money coming in off of my account base. In retail, you have a bad month, you had a bad month. You have too many bad months and payroll becomes an issue. I mean, I respect the heck out of you. But let's say you want to add some residual income. That tends to be this scenario number 2. So hence, we had an even distribution in here of retail and buy here, pay here, and both. You guys are all here for the same reason. So both scenarios have pitfalls. Both scenarios are going to require structure and finesse to be made to work because I'm not lying to you, ladies and gentlemen. This is like a quicksand pit-filled compliance mess. It's a tough line to walk, okay? So, presentation's broken up into two halves. Making sure you know what the issues are, and then we talk about some of the potential solutions. So, before we even get started, the best answer is the one we've always given you. If you want to do retail, and you have the wherewithal to do so, separate facilities, separate lot, separate name, separate. Vehicles only transferred between entities at fair market value. Though that's the absolute best answer for this. That has not changed. But hey, I don't mind seeing how close to the lines I can get. Let's think about, for those dealers, that a second lot's not feasible. I mean, let's say you're in a metropolitan area. You know how tough real estate is to get. Brad, how tough would it be for you to buy a lot right now? Yeah, very. Another piece of property is not necessarily an option. For some of you, it might be. But anyway, I just wanted to lay that out. This discussion is about the things on the margin. So, problem number one, the one we've always heard about, is pricing. How in the world do you maintain the integrity of your buy here, pay here model when we already know we can't price them the same way for retail lenders, point of sale lenders, as we do for ourselves? The two models are incompatible, and they are still incompatible. That said, how many of you use point of sale lenders, outside lenders, right now? Westlake, those kind of guys. I mean, you guys all have, I mean, you're in here for a reason. Most of you have access to other lenders. Do those lenders have rules? Like how much they'll allow you to finance? Do they give different calls for different vehicles? Some lenders really love certain vehicles and others not so much. That's fairly common. It's actually gotten quite detailed. Underwriting data is out there that will tell you which vehicles they're going to love because of how they perform. We know this from the buyer pay here world. We know what performs. Trucks and SUVs are the ones that carry they're the best performing units you can sell. Wish they were, cheap enough to acquire, but they're the best. They perform the best. Compact cars perform the worst. Established fact. It is what it is. The problem with integrating on the same lot is if you do not, you got to find a way to separate your inventory in such a way where if you want to carry that higher end retail unit, you're not in any danger whatsoever of financing it buy here, pay here. So you cannot charge more for in-house deals than you do for outside deals. Cannot, shall not, do not, this is not in dispute. This cannot be done. If a sufficiently egregious example could result in Truth in Lending Act violations.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on what David's saying, from the retail perspective, if you're a buy here, pay here dealer, the shift when we're talking about pricing issues, on the retail side of the house or from the retail perspective, what is your pricing strategy? Set aside the idea that you may have a buy here, pay here tiered pricing system or something like that, but when you start buying cars for retail, what's the pricing strategy? So there's two main models out there right now. The more traditional model would be a pricing age strategy, and this is a bucket system. So this is where you say, okay, we're going to price our cars to hit a home run as quick as we can because that's when we have the opportunity to make gross, is early when we own the car. So we bring a car, and time to line affects this, and we all know that. There's been a session or two about time to line. So time to line, if you don't know what that is how long does it take you to physically get your vehicle to the front line from the time it goes on to your floor plan, or in this room from the time you acquire the vehicle. What is the length of that time? What we've found in 20 groups and dealing with dealers is if you say you can do that in 5 days, it's really 10 days. Because when you see the data, you start to realize that things get hung up in service. So if you're trying, on the retail side, if you're trying to hit a home run, if you want to say it that way, if you're trying to maximize gross and you've got a 30-day window to do that, and it takes you 10 to 15 days to get your cars on the front line and ready, well, then you've cut your ability to make and maximize gross in half. So at 30 days, now if you're working in retail, and all this is going to come back to floor plan here in a minute, but if you've got that 30-day window to maximize gross, you want to get your vehicles on the lot as quick as you can so you can maximize the time that you have to sell them. And then we're going to look at the inventory. Some dealers are looking at them daily these days because the values can change pretty quick. How many of you have seen that in the last few months? Values can drop very quickly, and you cannot outrun depreciation, especially when you're working off a floor plan on the retail side. So if I've got 30 days, at 30 days, I'm going to look at my inventory at a minimum weekly. And then just to make sure, I may want to do some pricing adjustments. And if I've had vehicles that I've had in stock and they've went over that 30-day window, then I'm going to drop the price or evaluate the idea of dropping the price. And you may have 3 or 4 buckets set up. So 0 to 30, 31 to 60, 60 to 90, and 90-day plus. And so as I'm monitoring my inventory, anything that's going outside and into a new bucket, I'm lowering the price. Because what are your alternatives in pricing? If you're proud of that vehicle and you're trying to retail it and you can't in-house finance it because maybe it's not the right vehicle to in-house finance, or maybe you just don't want to finance that car, what are your alternatives? You could stay proud of it, not drop the price, and then take it to the auction. But we all know what happens when you do that. I mean, you're going to lose $3,000, right? If you take that car back to the auction. So the best scenario on the retail side as far as pricing is to make sure that you're trying to stay in front of your depreciation from your floor plan and getting rid of that car as quickly as you can, ideally within 60 days. And if you can't stay proud of it. You got to drop that price and get rid of it with the intention of being able to make up any losses that you made on the gross on the back end in your F&I product sales. The last thing I'll say about this, and then I'll flip it back over to you, David, on pricing, is the other model would be a race to the bottom price, or what we kind of coin as race to the bottom. This would be well, there's other labels for it too, but we'll just say race to the bottom. That's where all your competitors and you're really working against yourself in this scenario, but you're trying to have the cheapest car because of the internet, because we feel like our buyers, our consumers are price sensitive. So we want to get them in, and to do that, we have to be the lowest price out there. That is the other model. And there are, obviously, we could have an argument or a debate back and forth between which 2 models are the best, but that's not the scope of this presentation. I just want to make you aware, if you're a buy here, pay here dealer and you're thinking about moving over to the retail side, floor plan, what about holding costs? Raise your hand if you know what your daily holding costs are. You even have holding costs in the buy here, pay here side, but you need to know what your daily holding costs are, what your floor plan expenses are, and you'll see if you run the math out, it's all a math game, that by the time you've held that car for 90 days, even if you hit a home run and you don't change the price, chances are you just lost a bunch of money.
So let's get some of the model differences out of the way. For anybody, this slide's intended for those who just aren't as familiar with how it needs to work on the other side. And I'm going to start with my buy here, pay here brothers and sisters in the room. Look, neither of these models are something to be entered into lightly without experience, because when you do both, you have quadrupled your training requirements. You have quadrupled your advertising compliance. You have things you have to watch. So, do not enter into this lightly. Buy your pay your guys, it's not as simple as buying an expensive truck, throwing it on the front line, and hey, we'll send this one retail. Guys, it's a lot more complicated than ask any retail dealer. Because what my buy here, pay here dealers, you make a bad buy, you pay too much for a vehicle, meh. If it's still a good vehicle, you can still make a deal out of it, right? Does that apply in the retail world? No. There's a limit beyond which thou shalt not finance. And if your car cost is more than that, you really made a mistake, you're out money. And there's nothing that quite makes you feel as good as a negative gross deal. Oh, let's just get rid of it. Nothing makes you feel quite so good. So ultimately, buy here, pay here is more profitable. You run the math. There's a reason buy here, pay here dealers do buy here, pay here. But what makes buy here, pay here successful? This is the most important part. Structure, inventory acquisition, things like that. But the keys to buy here, pay here success are in the servicing of the contracts. So my retail dealers in the room, give you a little hint. It's not as easy as you might think. Collections, pardon my French, suck. They're hard. Think about who we're financing. Think about who Westlake and Santander and those guys are buying today. Whew. I mean, there was a period there where I knew where to send my turndowns. I mean, the aggressive lenders, it was real. It is changing. It is backing off, thank goodness. And as such, when it comes down to servicing, it means you're holding notes, which means you do not get to cash this note out right after you sell it. Meaning, you've got not enough money to replace that car you just sold unless you have cash from another source. Buy here, pay here takes a ton of cash to do, even properly. So again, retail guys, this isn't something you dabble in. If you want to get into buy or pay here, you go all in. Even if you're going to be a small volume, 10 deals a month is still requires compliance. It requires proper execution or you will lose your shirt. I have probably created more charge-off than almost anybody in this room, except maybe Titus. Sorry there, brother. How you doing? Whether it's easy, these are not, neither model's easy to operate for the other type of dealer unless you know what the heck you're doing. And that experience tends to come at a high price. It's expensive. Mistakes are how we learn, right? And mistakes generally are never free. So, again, to emphasize with the differences in the model, and I want to point out one thing that's not on here but should be, floor plan. Floor plan and buy here, pay here don't mix very well. Unless you've got a very nice setup or you're doing an amazing job at getting cash up front, you have to pay the floor plan off well before you have enough cash in on the account to actually do it. So it's useful for stock-up situations, temporary things like that, but if you live your life on a floor plan and buy here, pay here, you basically got a benefit out of it once, and then it's the gift that keeps on giving because you can't get off of it. It's like crack. You can't stop. It's very difficult for that because of the cash flow issues. So flip side of that, if you're going to start carrying high dollar, high-end units, now I'm going to consider a floor plan. I'd be careful about what I floored. I wouldn't floor everything just because I'm going to carry a few extra nicer units. It's all about the timing on how you can cash out. You have to consider that.
Yeah, talk about the model differences. So on the buy here, when you're a retail dealer and you're not doing buy here, pay here, you have one less department. You don't have collections, which is a robust department with heavy in compliance, with personnel and problems and all that jazz. But there is actually a department that I would say is missing in the buy here, pay here space. And if you're thinking about doing some retail units, you may have overlooked, and that's F&I. So if you're paying attention at all to the retail space, margins are shrinking on the front end, and they have been. And luckily, more on the new car side than on the used car side. But one thing that you need to be considerate of, there's two different models I'll throw at you for the retail process or your staffing is a better way to put it, that you may want to consider, because if you're a buy here, pay here, you probably don't have somebody that's dedicated to selling product and spinning paper and protecting the dealer, and that all happens in the F&I. In the retail side, we talk about the most money, the most gross profit is generated by square foot in the F&I department. That's where we sell product, and that's very different from the buy here, pay here space. Now there are some lines that blur, but it's very different. And the two main models on the retail side of the house right now that we're seeing is the traditional model, and this would say that you have a sales force or sales professionals with a sales manager that's desking deals and a traditional F&I manager, much like the model that you would see in a new car store. And the F&I manager is coming out and getting involved in the deal, selling the product, wrapping the deal up, doing the paperwork, keeping everything compliant, and he's paid on the back end, or she's paid on the back end. That's the more traditional model. one model that we're seeing a very big surge in right now is the elimination of the F&I manager in the independent space, where you have your sales professional, you have a sales force, and then you have a sales manager or multiple sales managers that are desking, and then you don't have an F&I manager at all, a traditional F&I manager. And the sales force is working deals cradle to grave. And I heard in a breakout yesterday, overheard somebody say that that model doesn't work for large volume retail dealers. And I'm here to tell you it does work for large volume dealers. I've got lots of large volume, 300, 400, 500 cars a month retail dealers that are using that model. I've seen a big surge in it. There's a lot of reasons why, but those are the two main. I know you covered, I hit floor plan a minute ago, but when we're talking about models on the retail side, one of the biggest questions that people have is, well, who do I hire first? Do I hire a sales manager that can desk deals, or do I have an F&I manager that can spin paper, or am I the salesperson? So you really got to consider and go into a retail operation thinking, okay, how are we going to structure this? Which model are we going to live by? Because every decision that you make after that will be based on that first decision of which model you're going to practice on the floor. Does that make sense? So those are the two primary models we're seeing right now. And yeah, I'll flip it back to you, Dave.
Okay. Next one up, hot spot on this is training. And Justin hit on, in that last slide, he hit on a lot of the things from a training standpoint that we have to be aware of. We all, buy here, pay here dealers, we all know the customer's not that hard to close. Fact is, if you're willing to cut corners and just blow through the paperwork, it's a cinch. I'm not advocating this, by the way. I'm just saying it's very likely your customer will sign what's put in front of them. True? In fact, it's so true that we actually have a moral obligation to slow down, to make sure if this is going to be your note, your money on the street, you need to make sure that that customer got the message before they left. You got to slow down. This is contrary to typical contract closing, where it's all about getting the initials and the dates in the right spots and don't miss anything on the documents and hope they understood what they got. Congratulations, send me referrals. In a buy here, pay here deal, you're holding the note, trust me, you got to set the stage hard. That closing has to be very specific, much more difficult. That customer needs to know what they're getting into, because they're never going to read that stack of paperwork you gave them. So they need to know what it contains, and they need to know in an unambiguous way. Trust me, you're not going to lose deals because you did this. I mean, 480B can get in a car is still a 480B can get in a car. They're gonna, but we have to make sure that we understand our internal financing guidelines, what each of the lenders we deal with will and will not accept, which ancillary products, which providers are stipulated by which lender. We have to keep track of all these things. So for your buy here, pay here dealer, that's all new territory. Never occurred to you might have 3 different service agreements that, depending on which lender they're with, which one you offer the customer. It never occurred to us. We normally have one, and it's normally our own, and it's, sold 99.9% of the time. So from a training standpoint, the F&I has to be handled very carefully, but so does sales. Last thing we want is for that buy here, pay here customer to come on lot, see the most expensive car you got, fall in love with it, and that's what they've got to have. And then we finally get a credit app and we find out, wow, you've never paid anyone, ever. For a long time, you've never paid anyone. And wow, I don't think we're going to be able to get you financed. I don't even think the credit union will take this one. So then you're stuck, because now you've got to do the unenviable task of flipping that customer off the hot, shiny, sexy unit you got up front into your back row queen. That is not a fun process. So our salespeople have to be trained to get that customer off the lot and in the building and on a credit app as quickly as possible. The more discussion that takes place before the credit app, the harder it is going to be for you to part the Red Sea. We also have to talk about how you sell financing. I'm going to give you a little hint. One of the answers I have in here is treat your either a related finance company or just your in-house financing program as a lender. It's a separate lender like everybody else. They got their own rules. They'll finance up to X. Let's say X is $11,000 amount financed. All right, that's a reasonable number these days for a buyer, payer, dealer. You've got rules for that. You may even have an interest rate pricing policy that depends on repeat customers get a lower rate next time around. That's legal. That's fine. As long as it's based on objective criteria and it doesn't, there's no disparate impact on a protected class, there's no problem with that. That's okay. I know that you've probably been told the safest response is to always charge the same rate, and it is. But that doesn't mean you can't vary it. You just have to have an objective reason for doing so. It can't be, well, he's my buddy. We go to church together. Or our kids walk their dogs together, or he's the pastor from my church. Or no, those are not objective. It's fine if you want to give that guy a deal, but it's got to be on the front end, not the back. Remember, treat your in-house lender like a lender. Everybody's got rules. Lenders stipulate what service contract to carry. We covered all that. So, training this requires that you pretty much have to quadruple your training effort. Doubling it's not enough. Salespeople have to understand what we're doing on both sides of the ball. They will know, trust me, because they'll have deals blow up on them, what happens when you get somebody that's in love with the wrong unit too soon in the process. There has to be control. There has to be a lot of interaction with the customer. We have to bring them along and educate them on our process. And it's like, hey, you may qualify for credit union financing and that sort of thing. Excuse me. But the training aspect is critical. You have two different types of deals out there, and in a lot of cases, they have to be approached differently. The key is figuring out which one you got first. And that's where less is more, don't talk so much, and get them inside. Anybody ever see the movie Suckers? Am I that old? Just get them inside the building. You can't sell a car on the lot. You can crush your deal on the lot, but you can't sell it. Sir?
In reference to adjusting interest rates, does that have to be like on a written policy kept on hand and continuously get audited by, let's say, some crazy government entity?
The best answer for your question is yes, it should be a written policy where you specify the conditions under which a interest rate break is acceptable, and you need to follow it, because it's worse than not having one at all if you're not going to follow your own rule. The idea of the rule is for you to stand behind something that says, hey, this is how we do it objectively, and we do it this way every time. If you don't have the second part of that sentence, you got a problem. Clear? A written policy. This is one of the easiest things for you to do. Writing the policy is a cinch. 5 seconds. Complying with it, that's different. Justin.
Yeah, so from the training perspective, I would start with, if you're a buy here, pay here dealer and you're considering retail, it all starts at the buy. The inventory acquisition. How many know in the room that most of the table is set when you raise your hand and buy that car? And so it's a little more forgiving in buy here, pay here space because of things like floor plans. So if you're going to move into the retail space and you're going to start getting on a floor plan and vamping up inventory, any mistakes that you make, now not to say you can't make some mistakes, we all make mistakes, but your mistakes are very amplified and hard to overcome. So there's a couple of things when we're talking about training that I would highly recommend, and that is, number one, make sure you have some type of a buying process. Whether you've learned that from us or from a 20 group or from whoever you've learned that from, you want to make sure you have some type of process for your acquisitions. You also want to make sure, what cars you don't want to buy, what cars you do, but you want to get a lot of that from your target audience. And this is another reason why blending two lots can be difficult unless you're if you're a buy here, pay here that's selling very cheap retail cars when the opportunity arises. And even that has some major compliance issues. But if you're really going to start buying, if you're really thinking about moving into the retail space seriously, and especially as your ACVs increase, then you can really run into an issue if you're not considering your floor plan, your holding costs, and all those issues. So you have to know your audience as well. You have to know what vehicles are going to attract your target audience. That's going to maximize your ability to sell volume and hold gross. That's a little different on the buy here, pay here lot, because a lot of the buy here, pay here customers are attending your lot because of their credit issue, not so much because of the vehicle. I know it's a combination of the two, but on the retail lot, it's solely determined by the vehicle mix that you have. And a lot of new retail dealers or retailers that are trying to get into the independent retail space, one of the biggest struggles they have in the beginning is figuring out which cars to buy, because there's a lot of different options, right? You can do imports or domestics, old cars, new cars, cheap cars, expensive cars, SUVs, trucks. Do we lift the trucks? So I mean, there's a lot of different avenues you can go. There's a lot of niche, and I don't want to call them boutique, but there's a lot of niche dealers that do very well by focusing in their area on a specific type of vehicle. So when we're talking training, I would say inventory acquisition from the retail perspective is mission critical, because if you keep making a bunch of mistakes, and it's hard to admit, if you're the owner and you're the buyer, it's hard to admit that you're a bad buyer. I mean, it's a hard thing to say, well, you know, I'm in the car business, I'm not just very good at buying cars. I mean, most people don't even admit that for a long time, right? So you have to be objective and make sure you're looking at yourself honestly and saying, hey, are we doing a good job on the inventory acquisition? The other thing I would tell you, as far as training your team, and what David touched on as far as the sales team, you know, many of the issues, and it's probably the same in buy here, pay here, but as you begin to grow and you have a staff, many of the issues that we see that cause operations to plateau or not grow or decline come from poor management. Poor management. The sales management staff and the F&I management staff, if they don't have a strong leader, if there aren't good processes and structure, or if they're not a unique individual, then they can really hurt you. And we tend to sometimes blame the sales team, you know, a little bit more than we blame the sales managers. But if your sales professionals are failing, then your management team is failing. And one of the places that we see the biggest difference between buy here, pay here, and the retail space and the sales process is management getting involved early in the sales process, and then there's a divergence, if you will. Like we both meet and greet customers on the lot. We both take phone calls. Customers drive in. We go say hi. But there's a point where we get into the sales process on the retail lot where it takes a turn, and that's in the vehicle selection process and the lost art and science of the car business on the retail side, selling the car, presenting the car, doing walkarounds, opening up the trunk, opening up the doors. I mean, a lot of dealerships have forgot about that part. You know, we'll spend an hour every day in sales meetings teaching salespeople how they can build trust and relate to customers, and then we won't teach them anything about their inventory and how to sell a car. But that's the part that we need to really, on the retail side, you build value, and by building value, that's what allows you to maintain growth. There was a study done a few years ago that on a retail lot, the salesperson has dropped the price $856 within the first 15 minutes of meeting a customer. And you might say that's not true. Well, you might be surprised at the conversations that are happening between salespeople and customers. And it's management's fault. It really is. So the demo is a great example. You know, the demo is where we have pre-planned written demo routes where sales professionals go get the car, make sure I'll just run through a quick scenario that's a little different than buy here, pay here. You got a customer that we think wants a particular vehicle. We've done a good car down. We have an idea of what their needs, wants, and all that jazz is. And so we put our heads together with the management staff. We pick a car, the one best car in inventory that we think we got the best shot at selling this to the customer. Because this is pretty much on the retail side. This is a one shot, one kill kind of deal. If you're gonna spend an hour with a customer on a vehicle on the retail side and they don't like it, you don't close, the odds, speaking of odds here in Vegas, the odds of you closing now on a switch are dramatically, less than 50% dramatically decreased. They're worn out, they're tired, and they feel like you've just shown your best cards. And they don't necessarily want to go through that whole process again. So the idea that we do the right vehicle selection the first time in retail is mission critical. Excuse me. Who do you think in the dealership on a retail lot knows the inventory better than anybody? The salespeople? Who? Owner or the sales manager? Whoever's buying the inventory? And I don't know if you guys have ever had this where you're working a car deal and you're busy and you got lots of things going on, and a salesperson comes up and they say, hey Roy, we got a black Civic on the lot. Is there a black Civic here? I know you're busy. And you're like, yeah. Turn around. You see that window right there? See the black Civic right there in the window? We got a black Civic. Okay. Sorry about that. 15 minutes later, hey Justin, I know you're busy, but do we have a blue F-150 here? And you're just, the managements and the owners are about to blow a gasket, like a grenade's about to go off. Haven't I told you to walk your inventory? But I want you to respect this. Anybody ever had that? Hey, yeah, it's right there. It's on the showroom floor. It's right behind you, that car you're looking for. But you got to remember this, put it in perspective. Who bought the car? Who did the analysis of what vehicles that we need on the lot to begin with? Who's our target audience? Who purchased the car? Who made sure it got from the auction all the way over to our dealership? Who put it through service? Who approved the service work? Who priced it online? Who then made sure it got through detail? Who authorized the detail? Once it got through detail, who made sure it was on the front line? Well, the owner or the GM or the sales manager did all that. So they're always going to know the inventory better. The key to that story is you want to make sure you're leveraging that. And what I mean by that is make sure if you're selling on a retail process that the sales professional working with the customer is in tune and in touch with the management staff that knows the inventory better than anybody to do vehicle selection. So Dave, I'll pick it back to you.
All right. This one's a quick one. We've touched on this one already, but the inventory is not the same. Buying inventory for a retail model, a point-of-sale model versus a buy-your-pay-your model, it's different. Both require good vehicles, but it's easier to cover up a mistake in the buy-here-pay-here world than it is in the retail world. And something, again, to caution dealers who are thinking about buy-here-pay-here, cash and deal is a number as a buy-here-pay-here dealer that you need to get comfortable with. That's the check you wrote when you gave that customer your car, and you are on the hope system of getting it back. And in these days, cash and deal tends to be over $7,000. That's with recon expense added in, so that's why it's over 7. A good unit doesn't mean the same thing in both models. So, are you guys tired of hearing about what you can't do? You want to hear about what you can? Let's talk. We had to lay the groundwork. This is stuff that's important, but let's talk about some solutions. Idea number 1, treat your, I'm going to use the term related finance company generically, okay? Your in-house financing operation, but treat your related finance company just like any other lender you do business with. They have rules that have to be followed. The key to this is limiting the amount financed you'll carry in-house. Now, some of you guys are going to want to think about that exception deal, that exception that proves the rule. Well, this is a good deal. We just have to carry a little bit more. No, you're missing the point. Because as you go up in ACV, what happens to your gross profit? It goes down. And in the retail world, your gross profit is determined by not you. Correct? You're at the mercy of what you can finance that vehicle for. So you see where I'm going with this. Treat your own in-house program the same way. Okay, max amount financed in-house, $11,000. Well, if I've got an $18,000 truck, I'm not going to be able to do that in-house without a really big down payment. And at that point, do the deal in-house. It's not like you're going to lose on it. It's a truck. It's a nice truck, as long as you're following financing guidelines. Typical financing guidelines for you retail guys out there, it's a lot easier than check their credit score and which vehicle it is and match it up into a matrix. This is a bit of an art, because what that customer makes matters. It's not just about what you need to get the deal done. It's about what actually exists as an income producing criteria for your customer. I'm not suggesting that anyone would allow anything to go with less than accurate version of the facts. But that said, I know in my world I see fake income docs so often that I start to think everyone buying a car uses fake income docs at some point. It does you no good to put a bad contract on your books. You're on the hook for it. And it might take you a year on your cheap cars to get out of that car. You're never going to get that year. And it's funny how even cars that you repossess quickly still need more work before you can sell them again. Very rarely do they just get an oil change and a wash. So usually something else happened. They could have had the car 48 hours and something happened. Well, you're on the hook for that. Congratulations. Welcome to Buy or Pay Here. Hope you enjoy yourselves. But setting a maximum amount financed will allow you to create different tiers in your inventory. How you price your inventory, particularly for accounts you're financing yourself, are really important. But also having consistency across the board in your pricing. Where you run into problems is when someone can demonstrate without exception that you have deals that you sold through point-of-sale lenders on similar vehicles at a vastly different price point. I was talking to Roy about this last night, and it was like, it's kind of the difference between a pig and a hog. You know, pigs get fat, hogs get slaughtered. You take too big a bite, it's too easy to, it'll come back to bite you at some point. Did you ever get the idea, you buy your payer dealers, that you could never negotiate price with a customer? You probably did. You probably heard it from me. That's not actually true. That's just the safest answer. It's not actually true. You're a car dealer. Car dealers negotiate price every single time. Do you not? You retail guys? Do they ever just take it, price as given? Doesn't happen that often. There's usually some back and forth, right? Well, we don't normally have a lot of that in the buy or pay here world, but I'm not saying give it away, guys. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying they're not as different as you think they are. Having some set rules. Payment to income requirements, very important. Don't set a customer up in a deal they can't afford just because you can. That doesn't work. There's no way to put a happy face on that when I give somebody a $700 car payment and they make $712 in SSI. There's no way to make that deal make sense. And lenders do it today. They stipulate who you can and can't use for ancillary products. There are approved and non-approved providers. Well, your finance company can do the same thing. I'm not saying stop doing CPI. I'm not saying stop doing debt cancellation, although that's a discussion, a totally different hour-long discussion on that one. But you just have to be specific in your policies. You guys get that I can't just give this to you, right? Now, I'm not trying to sell it. I just can't. You got to form what works for you, and then run it past competent local counsel to make sure you're not running afoul of any state and federal laws. There, another disclaimer. More on the solutions. You get a tier pricing model on your inventory. That basically means it's okay that you've got a sliding scale on gross profit. Buy or pay here dealers in the room, we have that now. Do you get the same gross in the deal on your really expensive stuff? If you have a big swing in your inventory, no, you typically don't. Because we're stuck with financing constraints. I can't put a customer in a car they can't afford, which means, well, I got an $18,000 unit with $3,500 down. Wow, I'm financing, what was that, $14,500? So tell me how you're going to get the payment at $400 a month. What? I'll go ahead, do the math. It's going to take, I mean, do you want to do a 96-month note? No. And just because the point-of-sale lenders out there will do stupid long loan terms doesn't mean you should. That's why having your lower ACV vehicles available to flip that customer to when they don't qualify with anyone is essential. Quit trying to jam them into the high-end unit. Your salespeople are going to want to do it because they're the easiest things to sell. Okay? Deals above the buyer payer financing threshold, they've got to be cash or outside finance. That's just how it needs to work. I also recommend you unbundle warranties, anything that you may currently include. I'd recommend going to a menu platform. I mean, how often do they turn down a service agreement in the buyer payer world? Never. Very, very rarely. Go with the menu, sell the services, and let the customer have choice. That's one of the things that regulators nationwide have said is consumer choice is very important to them. So we need to provide choice, and it needs to be real choice. Well, customers picking, but our job is to put the deal together in such a way that we're going to deliver an acceptable degree of penetration, because you know what? Those ancillary products aren't just money makers. They also help the customer a ton. It's one of the few things in business that really is a win-win both for us and the customer. So we can't, unbundling things, go into a service agreement instead of a warranty might be a good idea in a program like this. Think about your buyer payer deals, and if you mark up for a warranty, well, let's say you marked it up $1,000 to include a warranty. I'm just keeping the math simple because it is still early. So I've got $1,000 I can take out of that deal and still be at the same spot, don't I? So I call it the Spirit Airlines approach. Don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid of a menu. A menu works great in buyer payer, provided that customer was set up properly, the credit app was taken properly, and we got the verbal and nonverbal cues when talking with that customer so that we knew where their hot buttons were and how to close them. Sound familiar? It's absolutely no different. Here's a few, and I'm racing through to the end to allow you guys some discussion and concerns. Retail guys, if you're thinking, wow, I've got all these deals that nobody will do, maybe I should do some of these in-house, get out. Stop. Okay? Generally, someone else will buy a deal after you would say no. There's lenders out there that still will buy silly deals. They just don't make any sense. Yeah, don't keep the worst accounts you do in-house. You've got to have an acceptable level of risk, but it's really important that you don't treat this as the dumping ground for your bad apps, because it's going to kill you. Ask anybody whose primary business focus is buy here, pay here, and they will tell you what happens when you only take the crap of the crap. Your portfolio tends to not perform very well. If your portfolio doesn't perform well, you didn't just lose a little, you lost a lot. Everything's about the contract servicing. Your buy here, pay here customers, they're always going to want the nicest unit on the lot. Nothing new, right? You guys already should be past masters at flipping people off the wrong car and getting them on the right car. Not saying it's easy, but it's something that we've had to do forever. And just a couple of reminders. Unless you really go with some different pricing tiers, you're going to end up, as Justin brought up earlier, you're going to end up cramming down your front-end gross on your buy or pay here to make this compliant. I don't recommend that. But let's say you cut front-end gross, you unbundle and you cut front-end gross, and you still properly sell and or offer your ancillary product mix to your customer. Okay. Can I tell you a secret about buy or pay here and in-house financing deals? Gross. It's an opinion. I won't know for 3 years what it actually was, because what you actually got on the deal was based on what you collected. Interest income, that's also an opinion. Neither of these numbers are actually real. An accountant will never agree with me on this. It boils down to cash. How much cash did I put on the street divided by the average payment on the account tells me how many months they have to be on the street and paying for me to begin to pay my overhead. Break-even analysis. If the break-even period's too long, you won't make it. Those examples Ken Shilson was showing yesterday, I did a quick break-even calculation on the typical, point-of-sale deal. That's a 35-month break-even. Think about that. 35 months before you even make any money at all. Oh my. No thank you. There is a problem with high ACV in buy here, pay here, and that problem is called cash. It takes mountains of it. And compliance, look, you just quadrupled your compliance headache. You've got to make sure you're clean. You've got to make sure you're doing these things right. And again, ladies and gentlemen, I told you in the first slide, this is not an optimal solution. I think it can be a workable one, but it's not an optimal solution. And shameless self-promoting plug, if you're not in a 20 group, why? There's a lot of 20 group members in here, but if you're not in a 20 group, why? That goes a long way to helping you keep things moving in the right direction, having that additional compliance look over and over. That comes with a 20 group. That's part of it. All right. We have about 5 or 6 minutes. I'm going to turn the floor over to Justin. And sorry I had to race through, but we weren't going to make it.
Yeah, I just wanted to make one more point, too. On the retail side, a very critical thing to keep an eye on if you're starting to sell vehicles retail and you're now working with lenders is your CIT, your contracts in transit. It's on your balance sheet, top left. It's a critical number because you're going to be chasing cash on the retail side as well, more so than the buy here, pay here. So you want to keep a good solid watch on CIT. With that, do we have any questions from the floor about, I'll come to you so we can get it recorded. And
kind of had two things. First, from the buy here, pay here side, we have just shy of $1 million in notes. When should we switch over to a related finance company for the tax savings?
Easy question with a complicated answer.
Or is it worth the paperwork and the additional?
Oh, it's generally worth it even when you're small, but it depends on what your future plans are. The thing about a related finance company is that it defers tax liability. That's the only reason to do it. That's it. If you're not going to be in a growth mode for the next few years, you're going to get limited benefit out of it. And it is expensive. I mean, it costs money and time to have it put together. So you've got to look at where you're headed. Do you plan to take that $1 million and make it $2 million? Get an RFC. If you plan on holding it where it is, it may not be worth it. But you got to run the math. And that's going to depend on which provider you're going to use and all that.
And then from the retail, we started off as cash, and then when we switched over to financing, we're seeing a lot of retailers at auction, from what I'm seeing, is they're paying a lot above clean trade. So it's like, how are you making this work with these bank deals?
Inventory acquisition is without a doubt the single most difficult thing we do as independent car dealers. Notice I didn't say retail and buy here, pay here. Independent dealers. This is the hardest thing we do. If we screw this up, it is the gift that keeps on giving. It's a real challenge. What I generally recommend to my dealers is you've got to extend your net. You've got to go to more places. And honestly, if you're not leveraging buying online these days, you're behind the curve. I can deal with a shipping charge that's too much, but I can't deal with not having enough inventory on the lot at the right price point. So it's a challenge, guys and ladies. I'm not kidding. It's the hardest thing we do. But everything we do from then goes from that. Justin.
Yes, my question is regarding buy here, pay here. On repossessions, if you want to be able to take the repossessions back in and still pursue the deficiency, what is a method you can bring the car back in at actual cash value and then still pursue the deficiency for the unpaid balance?
What state are you in?
New Mexico.
New Mexico.
Okay, easy. I got a lot of experience in New Mexico. What you want to do is, remember, you cannot have your cake and eat it too. If you want to keep a car that you just repossessed, you got a mechanism for that. Some states call it a strict foreclosure. Other people call it we accept the vehicle in full satisfaction of the obligation, blah, blah, blah. There's a mechanism for that, but you don't get to go after the customer too. That's where you can really run into a compliance issue. You cannot have your cake and eat it too. Well, hey, I'm buying this repo backer. I ran it through the auction and I was the high bidder. Stop. Liquidate the unit at auction, call it what it is, let somebody else buy it, take them to court. And New Mexico's a fairly easy state to do that in. You got a really high small claims limit and a long statute of limitations. So, okay, go for it. But don't try and keep the car and sue. I don't recommend that for anybody. That is not the way to go about it.
We're actually out of time, so David and I will be here for a few minutes.
Yeah.
And we want to encourage you to come up if you got more questions and ask us.
Couple of quick announcements before I let you guys go. First off, next up is going to be the Expo and lunch from 11 until 3. Plenty of time. For those of you who went to dinner last night, I get it. We anticipated some issues with the concert backing up to the first night in the Expo. Come and see us today, please. But more importantly, see the vendors that are here supporting this event. They're worthy of your time. They got a lot of innovations, good products. Talk to these vendors. I look forward to seeing you guys later. And if you're not in a 20 group, why? Thank you.